We are lucky to have with us today Angela Cowan. She is the program manager for the counseling team at JFCS. She received a master's in social work from the University of Kansas and has worked in the mental health field for 10 years. Angela specializes in working with individuals experiencing severe and persistent mental illness, anxiety, depression, life transitions, and grief and loss. In her free time, Angela enjoys writing, knitting, and spending time with her husband and their dog, Ruby. Lindsay, where's Lindsay? Busy passing out handouts. She is a licensed graduate social worker and works as a case manager in senior services at JFCS. Lindsay has spent the past 10 years working with older adults, caregivers, and people with dementia. She is certified as a class leader for powerful tools for caregivers and leads the Memory Cafe at JFCS, a socialization and activity group for people with memory loss and their caregivers. All right. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you for joining us in this session on mental health and aging, the impact of social isolation. I'd like to start out today by first discussing a few terms we will use throughout our presentation: social isolation and loneliness. So what is social isolation? When we talk about isolation, we are talking about the lack of social connections. Social isolation can be reactive, as in it can be in response to a certain event that happens in your life. Social isolation can also be more long-term. And when social isolation is more long-term, it can become more detrimental to your well-being. So social isolation and loneliness are connected. They aren't exactly the same thing, though. So again, while social isolation is the lack of connection, of social connections, isolation or loneliness is the feeling of being alone, or the feeling of lack of connections, regardless of how many social connections one may actually have in their life. Social isolation can lead to loneliness, and loneliness can lead to social isolation. Okay. So how does social isolation happen? Many events in life can lead to social isolation. Changes in environment, such as retirement or moving to a new community, city, state, country, that can lead to social isolation. Grief and loss following the death of a loved one or the loss of a relationship can lead to social isolation. A decline in health due to injury, illness, or disability can also lead to social isolation. It can be difficult to address social isolation, and while we may not be able to prevent it, we can find ways to respond to both reactive social isolation and long-term social isolation. So now let's talk about who social isolation can impact. I will say no one is immune. It can happen at any point in life, regardless of age, race, sexual orientation, identity, or socioeconomic status. That said, older adults are more at risk for social isolation. According to a report by the National Health and Aging Trends Study, shortly before the COVID-19 outbreak, 28% of older adults aged 65 and up were already socially isolated, and that's about 9 million folks before COVID-19. At this time, it's estimated that 40% of adults age 60 and up are socially isolated in the US. For older adults in particular, loneliness is more likely to set in as well when there are limitations and when there is low family support. Some additional considerations for who social isolation can impact is the LGBTQIA population. For folks in this population, for older adults, they are twice as likely to live alone, making them more vulnerable to social isolation. Social isolation can impact folks differently when taking race and ethnicity into consideration as well. For example, studies have shown that Black Americans are less likely to live alone as an older adult than non-Hispanic white Americans, which could suggest lower risk for social isolation. However, at the same time, for folks who experience discrimination and exposure to race-related stress, this can lead to an increase in social isolation. Studies have shown a higher likelihood of social isolation for folks with a lower socioeconomic status. And for first-generation immigrants, they may experience stressors that can increase the likelihood of social isolation, such as language barriers, difference in community, family dynamics, and new relationships that lack that depth or history that they once had. So these are just some considerations to take into account when thinking of who social isolation can impact, how it impacts us. Now I'd like to introduce you to Ellen. Ellen lost her husband when she was 65 years old. Following the loss of her spouse, she threw herself into working and volunteering at a local hospital. She met up with her group of friends for coffee 3 times a week. She became more involved in her church. She visited friends and family. As the years went on, many in Ellen's friend group became ill and were moved into a nursing home or passed away. At one point, her coffee group could no longer meet. Ellen did continue to volunteer at a local hospital, though, so she had that connection in her life. At 88, Ellen eventually moved into a senior living facility. She had previously lived in her own condo, but it became more difficult to go up and down the stairs, and a senior living facility was a better fit for Ellen. She met new friends, she made new neighbors, and she continued to drive and volunteer at a local hospital. But then at 89, Ellen had a car accident and decided that it was time to give up her driver's license. But this meant that she could no longer volunteer because unfortunately the community that she lived in did not have reliable transportation to and from the hospital that she volunteered at. So Ellen built upon her friendships with her new neighbors in her senior living facility. She went for nightly walks, she met for coffee every morning, and she began to receive Meals on Wheels. This provided her with some additional contact with folks. In addition, she started to meet with a social worker, caseworker as well. So she had some contact that way. So this is just one story of how events in our life outside of our control can impact us and can lead to social isolation. Despite these events, Ellen was able to find ways to rebuild connections, so that was helpful that she was able to do that. Now that we've had some time to think about social isolation and how it occurs, Lindsay will talk more about the impacts of social isolation.
So the need for social connection is fundamental to being human, and when it's lacking, we experience impacts in all areas of well-being. So looking at physical health, researchers found that social isolation has similar health impacts as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So that's a pretty notable statistic. Isolation can lead to poor sleep quality. It can impact cardiovascular health. A study found a 4 times increased risk of death among heart failure patients. It leads to impaired immunity. A study looking at white blood cells in participants found that people with increased loneliness experience more inflammation and poor immune function, and an increased risk of dementia. So a study from National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine found a nearly 50% increased risk of dementia among isolated seniors. Another area impacted is social well-being. So once someone is isolated, and especially if they're experiencing loneliness, their self-esteem may decrease and they may start to experience increased social anxiety. And these impacts make it even more difficult to reconnect once someone is already experiencing social isolation. So people may have decreased social skills, difficulty building new relationships, decreased confidence, difficulty regulating emotions and feelings. So this increased stress may lead people to further withdraw from others. So Angela's going to talk a little bit about mental health impacts.
So social isolation and loneliness are found to have a significant impact on mental health as well, impacting it and leading to mental health decline. Social isolation is found to be associated with an increase in depression and an increase in anxiety, both of which can increase social isolation, so it creates this loop. Social isolation is associated with a decrease in sleep quality. It's associated with a decrease in executive functioning skills, such as planning, organizing, initiating tasks. Social isolation and loneliness are also strong predictors for suicidal ideation and suicide attempts. The relationship between social isolation, loneliness, and mental health are intertwined. Social isolation and loneliness can both lead to a decline in mental health, as I already mentioned. It creates a barrier to engaging in social situations by increasing negative thoughts or feelings, and by increasing feelings of hopelessness. Social isolation and loneliness can amplify each other. They can kind of feed off of each other and create more loneliness, more social isolation. A decline in mental health can also lead one to isolate from their support system. And so that could also lead to more feelings of loneliness. It can be difficult to find ways to untangle this web of social isolation, loneliness, and mental health. So now that we've spent some time discussing the impact of social isolation, you may be thinking, what can we do? So what can we do? We can look to building social connectedness. If social isolation is the lack of social connections, then social connectedness is the presence of more social connections, and more than just the presence. It is the idea that one has their desired number of quality relationships that make them feel supported, make them feel valued, and make them feel like they have a sense of belonging. And now I'll hand it back to Lindsay to discuss questions to consider with social isolation.
So we're going to spend some time talking about the many different ways that we can build and maintain social connectedness in our lives. And as we do this, we want everyone to be thinking about the following questions. So where have you made friends and connections in the past? And maybe also, how have you been successful in maintaining strong connections over time? What activities do you enjoy? If you're doing something that you enjoy, you're more likely to be around other people who have things in common with you. And when we do things that we enjoy, we feel open and more connected to the world around us. And then what's one small step you could take today? So if you were looking to build connection in your life, is there a phone call that you can make or a resource you can learn more about? Or someone in your life that you could reach out to? So we want to take a few moments to have you all reflect. If you could move on to the next one. Yeah. Sorry. So we want to take a few moments to have you all reflect, and maybe, and we're a little more spread out than we were anticipating here. It's a large space, but we were hoping maybe you could have a conversation with the person or people next to you, thinking about your own past experience or other ideas you might have, where are places that you might look to find groups or activities or opportunities to meet others? So we'll just take a moment if you want to think about it on your own, or turn to the person next to you and chat. Okay, so a lot of great conversations happening right now. We would love to hear from the group of some ideas that you've come up with.
Someone over here?
Anyone?
Anybody over here?
Social groups, sports events or sports clubs or
So social groups, sports events, sports clubs.
we had a folk dance group. Dancing.
What was the last one?
Folk dancing.
Dancing. Folk dancing, great.
Someone want to speak for this group?
I think you have some wonderful things to say.
I think you have to look at, first of all, what were your past connections? And I think you need to get them in order of, like number 1, 2, etc. And then when you're in the process of trying to make the adjustment, especially a loss of maybe your living environment into a new setting, then if you've categorized your past connections, focus on like the first and the second to get you sort of back in the groove, because those are primary, and then expand yourself to the rest of them later on. But get that support.
So maybe focusing on maintaining those most trusted and the closest connections in your life. Great, thank you. Mm-hmm.
I'll talk a little bit. A year and a half ago, my dad passed away, and my mom's husband of 60 years. So some of the places of connection is the place that they were very comfortable with together was Sabus JCC, Minneapolis JCC. And I know that's on your sheet as well, with some programming and some movies. So my mom spends a lot of time there. And great programming, and that being said, looking to make more connections there with maybe different programming or different changes, because it gets to be a long day and she doesn't like to be home alone. And the other thing that she's very savvy at, it's not in-person connections, but she's very savvy at Facebook and making connections online, which is something that can be lovely and at your fingertips, but also takes away from those social interactions. So that's another place to find connections.
Great. So the JCC has been really important. Then also you mentioned Facebook and social media, which, yes, can be a great way to stay in touch with people, and also not quite as rich maybe as interacting with someone more face-to-face. Yes. All right. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Those are some really great thoughts. And we have provided on our resource list, which if anyone didn't get that, if anyone snuck in the back and didn't get one, we've got some up here. Nancy can hand you one. But we've provided a list of some ideas for seniors. So local senior centers have tons of programming, and I found that it's best if you call or stop in and talk to someone at these kinds of places versus checking them out online. I found that they don't totally have a complete view of what they offer on their websites. So I would really suggest checking out senior centers. The JCC is wonderful. YMCA or fitness centers, exercise, like socialization is an activity that really benefits all areas of wellness. And there's a lot of classes out there specifically for seniors. And my in-laws, they're in their early 70s. After retirement, they started attending daily water aerobics classes, and through this daily class that they go to, they've found like just this wonderful friend group that is like their people now. So it's really, really fantastic. Libraries have tons of free programming. They can also help you research other resources. I wanted to mention I'm not sure if folks have heard of Osher Lifelong Learning Institute. It's also called OLLI. It's through the University of Minnesota. It's a learning community for people age 50 plus. They do charge an annual fee, but they have scholarships available. And they have all kinds of fascinating classes. They have travel groups and activity groups. They offer some classes over Zoom and some in person. This is a organization that some of my most connected clients are involved in. Local parks, religious communities. I also wanted to talk about volunteering. So there are so many opportunities for volunteering out there. I know at JFCS and JFS, we seek out volunteers for a variety of roles using a lot of skill sets, and I've included a JFCS flyer on volunteering that I handed out to you all, so you can see how to get in touch if you're interested in learning more about that. But I wanted to share a personal experience that I had as a volunteer. I lived in New York at the time and volunteered for a program that helped seniors care for their pets. I was paired with someone in the neighborhood where I worked who was a senior in the advanced stages of a chronic illness, and she had 2 cats that she just loved and adored. I'd stop by her apartment a few times a week and just help scoop the cat's litter box. It was less than an hour of my time each week. But without my visits, this person wouldn't have been able to keep the cats that she loves so much. But also during our visits, we would chat, and I really got to know her and ended up hearing her whole life story. And so 2 things that I took away from this experience. First of all, how meaningful and nourishing and connecting the experience of being a volunteer can be. But also how meaningful my visits were to this person beyond just the practical help that I was providing to her. So she was homebound and had disabilities that made her vulnerable to social isolation, and it meant a lot to have someone visiting regularly. So when we talk about older adults, this is a very diverse group, and some older adults are very active and involved in the community. And others, particularly those of more advanced age or with chronic physical or mental health issues, are the most vulnerable to isolation. And so we're going to talk more about some of these barriers that come up for folks and how we can address them. But going back to my story, on the surface, my role was not primarily to be a source of social connection, but that's really what I was for this person. And there are many supports for older adults out there, like Meals on Wheels, or housekeeping help, or personal care, or transportation help that can also be sources of connection. Okay, so we've talked about some ideas for getting started on finding social connection, but that doesn't mean it's easy for everyone to maintain connection. So here are some tips. Make engagement a habit or a part of your routine. So if we have something that's regularly built into our schedules, then it's much easier to keep on doing it. So think about attending regular classes or having a regular Monday morning walk or coffee with a friend or a Sunday night Zoom call with the grandkids, things like that. And then identify barriers. So most seniors who are socially isolated are experiencing barriers that make connection difficult. And as seniors age, like in Angela's earlier story about Ellen, they have new barriers come up along the way and need to figure out how to manage them. And it can be really, really challenging. So it's important to identify these barriers and then find resources that can help. And we've provided a list of some resources. It's not comprehensive, but we wanted to give you some ideas of what's out there. And if you are looking for help with a specific resource or want to talk through a specific issue that you're dealing with and get ideas, we suggest reaching out to a place like Senior Linkage Line, which is a statewide hotline where you can get information about lots of different community resources. And you can also reach out to JFS or JFCS. Both organizations have really wonderful and knowledgeable intake and resources staff that can let you know about programs both at the agency and out in the community. So Angela's going to start us off talking about some specific barriers that folks deal with.
Thank you, Lindsay. So we've talked a little bit about mental health and the impact that social isolation can have on it. And mental health can then create a barrier to, again, building those connections. It can do that by creating feeling of social anxiety or having low self-esteem, low confidence, or low motivation. So some ways to work through mental health is to meet with a therapist for individual therapy. Both JFS and JFCS offer counseling services. And in your work with a therapist, you may explore fears of social situations, expose yourself to situations that you're afraid of. You may work on challenging negative self-talk or negative thoughts. You may build consistency by breaking tasks into smaller steps. And you may learn some coping mechanisms to help regulate emotions. Another option may be joining some sort of group, a support group or a psychoeducation group. There are support groups for other folks who may struggle with connection and building those relationships, so that could be helpful. And actually, I just ran across a great group, a great support group for LGBTQ adults age 55 and up. It's called the Gender Diverse Elders 55 Plus group. And there's more information about that in your resource list as well. And another option to address mental health and to, so that it becomes more possible or easier to build that social connection is to look at medication. If this is something you're interested in, there is medication that can help with signs of depression or anxiety, and you can talk with your provider about that. And now I'll let Lindsay talk more about physical health.
Okay, so as we mentioned, physical health, disability, and chronic illness have a major impact for people. Issues like decreased mobility, pain, fatigue, or even needing to use the restroom frequently can make it a lot harder to get out of the house. And it's important that people do not assume that new problems or symptoms are just a part of getting older. You always need to see a doctor because treatment may be able to help. Physical and occupational therapy can often help with mobility or maintaining independence. It's important to have hearing evaluated regularly because hearing loss can make communication a lot more difficult. And then vision loss caused by diseases like macular degeneration impacts many older adults. State Services for the Blind, Minnesota State Services for the Blind has a free program to help with skills training and accessing adaptive equipment for older adults that are experiencing vision loss. So cognitive impairment. So dementia is a group of illnesses, Alzheimer's is the most well-known, that impact memory, language, and thinking. It's normal for people to have some cognitive changes and memory issues as they age, but if someone's experiencing a pattern of significant changes, it's really important to talk to a doctor so that they can get an accurate diagnosis and address treatable issues like medication side effects and depression, which can cause some of these symptoms. People with dementia are particularly at risk for social isolation. They may withdraw because they find social settings overwhelming to navigate, or they may worry about being judged. Stigma is a real issue for folks. Friends and family members may withdraw because they don't know how to interact with the person or don't realize that the person still wants and needs social contact. But the truth is that for people with dementia, social connection is just as important as for any other person. So if you're a caregiver for someone with memory loss, you can help them by letting people in their lives know that they still want to see them and to be around them. You can help guide others in how to interact with the person, because sometimes people just don't know what to do. You might say something like, Joe can't play golf any longer, but he'd love to go for a walk, or have you come watch baseball with him for an hour. Or maybe you'd say, Joe may not recall how his day was yesterday, but he'd love to sit and reminisce with you about high school or to look at old photos. So also, there are programs specifically for people with dementia. Memory cafes are a great example. These are regular gatherings for people with dementia and caregivers to meet, socialize, and do activities together. JFCS has a memory cafe that I coordinate. We meet twice monthly on Wednesday afternoons at our office in Golden Valley, so please talk to me or reach out to me. My contact info is on the resource guide if you want more information about that. Giving Voice Chorus is a choir for people with dementia and their caregivers. Alzheimer's Association has some programming, usually more for people with early stage dementia. Adult day programs can be really great for folks, respite programs. So moving along, I'm going to talk about transportation. So seniors sometimes need to stop or limit driving, and many of us live in places that are not walkable and where public transportation is difficult to use. There are a number of transportation programs out there for seniors, depending on your geographic location. In the West Metro, we have our JFCS Garber Transportation Program, so give us a call if you're interested in learning more about that. All right, Angela is going to talk about rural communities.
Yeah, so if you or someone you know is living in a rural community, that can also create a barrier to building that social connection. There are limited organizations in comparison to living in a city or metro area. There's also limited accessible transportation. So these are some things to take into consideration, but we have some ideas on how to work around this barrier as well. If your town has a library, you can look for groups hosted at the library. If your town does not have a library, please see your resource list. There's information on how to access a directory of libraries across the state of Minnesota, so you can find one that's nearest you. Looking for volunteer opportunities, so that's something that Lindsay has mentioned before, looking for ways to volunteer in your community. Even in rural communities, there are opportunities, perhaps at your school, perhaps at a religious organization, or if there's a food pantry in town, those might be some options for volunteer opportunities. This was mentioned before as well, online groups or social media like Facebook. Thank you for mentioning that before. That could be a great way to connect with folks if you're living in a rural community. And then also, if your town has a senior center, looking into programming that they have. Again, if it's a small community that does not have a senior center, there's information on your resource list on how to access a directory of senior centers across the state of Minnesota as well. Another barrier could be financial limitations. It can be hard to cover the cost of joining a group in some cases if finances are limited. It may also be difficult to pay for transportation, whether it's gas or whether it's public transportation. That can become a pretty significant barrier. So some thoughts on how to work through this barrier is to look for other resources that could help cover the cost of necessities in your life. For example, there's the senior commodities box, which could help provide some extra groceries throughout the month. There's also the SNAP program or EBT to see if you qualify for that. There are energy assistance programs as well to help cover the cost of utilities so that perhaps you have more funding to join a group or organization. In addition to that, there could be some low to no cost groups. Again, I think of online groups. This could be an option for building connection with little to no cost. In addition, there are organizations that offer scholarships. Most organizations will offer scholarships for seniors joining their organization or group. So it's always helpful to ask about scholarships or a discounted price for joining. One last thought is there's a really great program for seniors. It's AmeriCorps Seniors, where seniors become AmeriCorps members and serve other seniors in the community. This also comes with a monthly stipend. So not only is there some financial or finances coming in, but it creates a natural place for connecting with others through the volunteering. Now Lindsay will talk more about technology.
Okay, so technology can be a really wonderful way of reducing barriers. There are all kinds of classes and groups that meet virtually, and Zoom or video chat can be a great way to keep in touch with people. If someone is having mobility issues or difficulty leaving the house, they can stay connected. Of course, technology can also be a barrier for people who are less adept at using computers or who can't afford a device. So I wanted to highlight a program through the organization's Senior Community Services. Their home program provides a number of different services, but one of them is technology support. And they can do that over the phone or even come out and help in person. They've been really great when I've helped clients access their services. They can also help get connected to affordable internet services. So I wanted to talk about some tips for caregivers of seniors who are at risk of isolation. So first of all, supportive services for seniors, like we've mentioned, things like Meals on Wheels, housekeeping help, transportation help, can have the added benefit of being sources of social connection. So just important to keep that in mind. Another tip is to talk to the person about what they would enjoy and what they would want to do. So we can have all kinds of ideas about what would be best for someone, but they may have different ideas about what they would enjoy. So it's really important to talk to the person, be encouraging of them to try things, but also make sure you have their buy-in. And then start small. So remember, even 1 to 2 more points of connection throughout the week can make a difference for people. And then you can only do what's in your control. So sometimes caregivers identify that the person they're caring for needs more social connectedness, but then they struggle to convince that person to take advantage of opportunities. And that can be really hard. So you can support and encourage and provide opportunities. You can work on addressing barriers, but you can't force someone to do something. And so know that you can do what's in your power to do, but ultimately it's up to them to make that choice. So one final resource I wanted to mention is our outreach visitor and outreach caller programs, which are also sometimes called friendly visitors. These are not professionals or mental health providers. These are regular people volunteering to visit with seniors. And these programs are a great option for people who feel most comfortable with one-on-one interaction or maybe for homebound seniors. And at JFCS, we do have volunteer callers and visitors, but in order to be matched with a volunteer, you do need to be a client of senior services. And we currently have a wait list of people who need to be matched with volunteers. So if you are interested in this kind of a volunteer role, please do reach out to us. Most of our volunteers in these roles are seniors themselves, and they're really wonderful, and really I think a lot of our volunteers get a lot out of what they do, and our clients do as well. There's another organization called Friends & Co. that offers outreach volunteers and callers, and they also have a program called Coffee Chat on weekday mornings. It's a drop-in phone line where you can just call and have a talk with a friendly person. So this brings us to the end of our presentation. Thank you so much for being at the conference today and for joining us for this session. Isolation is one of the biggest challenges we see for seniors, and it can be a really difficult and complex issue to address. However, we do want you all to leave knowing knowing that there's a lot out there that can help. I think yes, thank you.
We're going to take a few minutes for questions.
Yeah, we got time for questions here.
I don't know if I turned, is this on?
Hello. Yeah. I'm curious about the link between introversion and isolation.
Yeah, so I think that so often people who are introverted, who maybe enjoy socializing in a different way than other people, can sometimes struggle more with isolation. Absolutely. Angela, did you have any additional thoughts?
I agree. With being more introverted, it can be more difficult to build those connections just based on comfort level. And I think in that case, maybe looking to some skills-focused groups may be helpful in just building up confidence in one's own social skills.
Hello, I don't know if this was mentioned or not, but the MSW system, the Minnesota State Colleges and Universities, folks who are over a certain age, I don't remember what it is, maybe 63, can take classes for free. Free.
Cool.
Whatever class you want. There is of course, a fees thing, and then if there's a trip, there might be a fees for materials. And then if there's a trip, there might be an extra cost. But the class itself is free.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that.
Classes are free. What if someone wanted to learn more, what would they Google?
Oh boy. Call up MSW, I think. I just sort of dove in and looked at the calendars. There is a website somewhere somehow that says how you do it, but you don't get first pick. The kids get the first pick at what classes, but then if there's an opening, you can take a class. Life intervened, but I was going to take a photography class, which was totally exciting, online during COVID.
Okay, so what was the acronym? Sorry.
Pardon?
What was the acronym again, just so I can repeat it?
MSW.
MSW.
Minnesota
Minnesota State
Colleges and Universities.
Colleges and Universities.
That's like the U of M, any of the U of M ones.
Cool.
And anything that's not private, anything that's not Bethel or Augsburg or something like that.
Great. Thank you.
Well, someone got a question?
I work with people with dementia. Are the positive effects the same if they can't remember that they've had social interaction?
That's a great question. And what I would say is when you're, with someone with memory, with dementia, of course, there's all different stages of dementia, but really the focus is on having positive interactions in the moment. And that's really, what we know in the moment. Is this person able to be connected and to be with someone and to be to feel like another person is there with them. So I would say, yeah, it's hard to know, in the long term how these programs kind of impact people, but I do think that those in the moment interactions are so important for people. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Is there one more?
Is there a formal assessment tool for isolation? Something that measures the degree of isolation?
There is, and I am not remembering the acronym for what it is, but I know I ran across that in some research we were doing. So I would be happy to share that with you if you want to email me. Or Lindsay, our contact information is on the resource list. Thank you, that's great.
Well, thank you, Lindsay and Angela. This was very, very enlightening, and we're so glad you could be here. I just want to remind everybody to fill out their evaluation forms and turn them in at the information desk at the end. But the closing ceremonies, well, the resource fair is still going on, and the closing ceremony is going to be in the sanctuary. You're in a lucky place. So if you can just want to relax or get up and move around for a while first. That's what I know.
Thank you.